Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Deep Chats here on Shed Sounds Media. I'm your host, Ian Beabout, and joining me today is my good friend and resident Jethro Tull expert, Jaco. Hello, welcome.
Hello,
How are you
everyone.
today?
I am in Italy, so I'm Italian, so that's a state of mind.
Jaco's claim to fame is that his name is in a Jethro Tull box set.
Yes, that's true.
And that's
You're
why
gonna
he knows
find
everything.
You have to find out which one is it, though.
And it's up to you to and to use your time and your funds, because some of these are quite expensive, to track down and find out which one it is.
Including the one that has my name. As far as I know, it hasn't been reissued yet. So.
No, it has not. I have a friend who's bought it recently and paid $100. $100 just to see Jaco's name.
I was about to say.
So
right.
Today, I thought in light of this brand new release, which I'm currently, oh, there it is. I've brought you all here today to talk about this brand new release, the Chateau D'Herouville sessions from Jethro Tull. And now I think what's interesting about this and why I wanted to talk about it with you today is that there have been various iterations of this over the years, and we've been kind of dripped tasty nuggets of it for decades.
Yeah, it's a bit like it's Jethro Tull's smile, you know.
Yes.
Kind of the mythology behind it, at least. I think I read some articles on the Tull Press website, which, in case you don't know, it's a fantastic resource for the Jethro Tull fans because it collects a lot of interviews and old-fashioned articles, and in some of these, if I remember correctly, Ian Anderson even said that he had burned the tapes back then, which is obviously not true. But
not true.
So this means that this stuff really became legendary because a Jethro Tull lost album from the golden period,
right?
A double album too.
And that's kind of the thing that for those of you who might be wondering, what the heck is this Chateau D'Herouville thing? What is this? So basically, if we're going to look at the timeline of history, this comes right after the Thick as a Brick record in 1972 and right before the Passion Play record. And there was something like, if you approach a Passion Play without the foreknowledge of this material, you might think, wow, it almost sounds like they've advanced 2 albums instead of 1 from Thick as a Brick. What is going on here? And then, you dig into the history and you find out that, Tull were at the time facing very high tax, like something like 98% of revenue.
Yeah, I think that was a problem of being in the music business, because I heard of other people that tried to move to Switzerland for that very same reason.
And they wanted to wanted to go to a studio that had a good reputation. So they went to the Chateau D'Herouville in France because Cat Stevens had recorded there, Pink Floyd's Obscured by Clouds, Elton John, Honky Chateau, famously.
Yeah, and then, it's after the Jethro Tull stuff, but David Bowie.
Yes, and David Bowie. Yeah. And so they arrived at the Chateau probably expecting, the best of the best of the best. And there was there's mention in the liner notes of like horseflies in the pool and all these dangerous creatures living in the wine. And the menu was terrible. Like they're eating horse and they're talking about repetitive soup injury and horrible gastrointestinal issues.
And if that wasn't bad enough, they also talked about incorrectly wired machines, so they tried to do another dub and accidentally raised another track that they didn't meant to. Yeah.
So if you're listening back to these sessions and you think, boy, these sound a little empty, it's because they abandoned them. They had recorded a planned 3 sides of a double album, and everybody was sitting back and listening to it, and nobody was happy with what they were doing. And it's interesting because in the liner notes, Barry Barlow says something to the effect of, I kind of feel like we shouldn't have abandoned this. Like it turns out in 40 years hindsight, because at that time it was 40 years, 40 years hindsight, it served the material well. Like it was still well performed and well arranged, but I think at the time the mood of the band was so low and everybody was sick that they had a bad association to it, and they just didn't want to work on it any longer.
Because they never completely abandoned it. I mean, a lot of it surfaced, well, not a lot, but some of it surfaced on a Passion Play, and on War Child too, from the same tapes and on the outtakes too, because, I guess we're going to talk about this later, but if you look at the sessionography on War Child on the box set, one of the first things that was recorded and has not been released, maybe it's lost, I don't know, it's a version of Left Right. So they were still thinking about this material in 1974.
I didn't know that, because I love Left Right. That's one of my favorite songs from the sessions, and I'm guessing we'll get to that soon. But maybe we could talk briefly about the release history and kind of the different versions, because this is the first time that I've actually sat down and listened to each one of them in a single day. So kind of talking about trawling through Tull history here. This was, at the time, there was nothing else like this. And there weren't even a whole lot of other bands yet who were opening up their back catalog, their vaults, in the way that Tull were. And this gave us stuff from the Broadsword era sessions that we hadn't heard before. It gave us live material, but
the B-sides, which were all out of print and very important, I think, in some cases, like stuff like the original version of Teacher. Well, we're digressing here. So
the reason why I bring this up is because this is a 3-disc set, an embarrassment of riches for 1988. And the second disc opens with 3 pieces from the Chateau, what they had then called the Chateau Disaster sessions. And Ian Anderson claims in the booklet, which made me laugh, he claims in the booklet that this reel is all that exists.
Well, it may have been true at the time. I mean, Ian Anderson doesn't exactly lie, in my experience. I mean, he may give incomplete information, but he never outright lies. So I think what he did was what they did to assemble that box set was do some research on the vaults, and probably not all of that was cataloged well. So it may have been true. That bit they released, which was supposed to be side 1, is obviously the most complete one of the 3 they recorded.
Exactly.
So maybe he just thought that it was the only one that was worthy of release. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I don't think he was lying when he said that. That was just my point.
The material that was presented wasn't even the complete reel one. It was about half of it. It was 3 pieces that were, I mean, they work quite well as like a little suite, but it's scenario, audition, and no rehearsal. And where did this come from? Like this bomb in the dressing room stuff it's super compelling. Yeah,
it is. And if you had knowledge of bootlegs, you would have heard some of that stuff on the second leg of the Thick as a Brick tour. They did audition, no rehearsal, which was also on the Passion Play tour, and Left Right, which of course is not on this box set. But I mean, hearing that stuff, which is not only of great quality, it's also pretty well thought. I mean, these are not scrapings.
No.
There's a dog barking. This distracting me as if it isn't hard enough to speak in another language. Anyway.
So the important thing also to mention is that this version of the Chateau D'Herouville sessions was also overdubbed in the late 80s, which is something that probably made a whole lot of sense at the time. And it kind of it whet the fans' appetite that only just a few years later we got a semi-complete release of the sessions. I mean, this is minus maybe 10 or 15 minutes.
Yes, the same. The only stuff that's missing is the stuff that didn't get released on the 8080 box set.
Right. And so we're missing like Skating Away on the Thin Ice of a New Day. We're missing Sailor.
Big Top, yeah.
Big Top. But this disc has massive, massive, massive flute overdubs.
Yeah.
And I have to admit that I grew up on this version, and I was a big Passion Play fan from the time that I was like under 10 years old, because it just captured my imagination that way. I didn't understand it, but I loved it, and it's just like the fact that I didn't understand it kept drawing me back to it. So I would listen to this stuff, and I didn't really think of it in terms of, oh, this is 1972 material with 1991 flute overdubs. It was just Jethro Tull music, and I ate it up. So, and I know we're skipping ahead here a little bit, but by the time that the Steven Wilson edition came out that was without flute overdubs, for a long time I had difficulty accepting it. And because it was different from what I was used to. It wasn't until I revisited this recording over the weekend, after 10 years of listening to the Wilson mixes, that I realized that this release is actually quite oversaturated with flute.
I was about to say that I think the reason people accepted those overdubs in 1993 was that they do fit in with the music. I mean,
they do.
Ian Anderson's voice in 1993 was, of course, very different than it used to be 20 years before. But the flute playing, I mean, you can do that. So I actually think the flute, there's some really great stuff on Nightcap, like stuff like Critique Oblique maybe sounds a little bit empty without those flute overdubs.
Yeah.
So it's not all bad, but you're also right, because I was revisiting some late 1972, early 1973 live tapes where they play the Chateau stuff. And when they do audition, there's no flute on it. So they Ian added the stuff in later times to complete it. But that's also true of the Broadsword stuff.
Yes.
Where it did the same stuff. I mean, some of those tracks were probably complete without a flute, and then he decided that it was needed. I mean, it's a valid thing to do as far as I'm concerned, because until you release something, it's up to you if it's complete or not, in my opinion.
I agree, and it's not like somebody else played those flute parts, but my point of view is that when Ian Anderson plays something that is a melody that was supposed to be vocals, I'm more accepting of it. But when he's playing these solos, like in the Critique Oblique section, that feel more like out of 80s Tull than his 1972 style, that's when it starts to bother me. Like, in retrospect, I wished he'd used just a little bit more restraint.
You didn't really have much of an option on that section, in my opinion, because on the Steven Wilson mix, there are long stretches of music where nothing is happening. They're just
That's true.
tracks. So he either cuts things up or he overdubs the flute. And one interesting thing though is that I'm sure you noticed that on part 1 of Critique Oblique, there was a saxophone solo.
Yeah.
Which he completely replaced with the flute in 1993. It
doesn't sound like he replaced it to my ears. It sounds like he blended it. It's sort of like at the beginning of this disc on what is it, First Post, where there's sax and flute at the same time.
No, I'm not talking about that bit. It's Critique Oblique part 1.
I know, but it's a similar, to my ear, it's a similar timbre choice, because he mixes the sax parts that were there in 1973 with some flute over top of it, to the point where it just kind of obliterates the sax. It's like, what is that weird sound that I'm hearing? And it's a combination of both instruments.
Yeah, I have to be honest. I never noticed any sax on the 1993 mix of Critical Blake. It may also be because the mixing. I mean, I don't want to say anything really, if you pardon my pun, really critical of it, but it really sounds confusing now to my ears between the equalization, the echo. So maybe it's there, but if
Yeah.
it's there, it's well buried in the background.
Well, that's what I mean by saying that the flute oversaturates it. Is that you can, especially comparing the Wilson mixes, like you can hear places where John Evans' organ tone is being completely obliterated by the flute. And I don't know if this is a mixing choice or if it's just the nature of the flute. It's eating up those frequencies. But I guess that's what I mean when I say that I wish that he'd been more decisive. And I would use it as an example, the broadsword sessions, like you brought up, because there are songs on those sessions where, and I'm talking about the Wilson, the box set mixes, where they mixed in bits of those later recorded flutes, and it does help to use it very decisively. It certainly does help. And sometimes I do wish, like, for instance, like Look at the Animals, like, or Law of the Bungle Part 1 as it's now known. That's a piece where I think the flute elevates it. Like, it sounds wrong.
Agree, yes.
Wrong without it, and that's because it's not really getting in the way of anything else, but it is filling in those gaps.
That part, which is side 3, I think, is the one with the best flute, in my opinion, the best flute overdubs. Also, Low the Bungle Part 2. I mean, I was listening. I heard the flute version for the first time after a lot of years. Just a few weeks ago, and the flute, that piece needs the flute. I mean, if you can't have the vocals, it needs something melodic on top of it.
Yep.
This said, I'm grateful that Steven Wilson didn't mix the flute on the 2014 stuff, because it really gives you an idea of how much they were into the album when they abandoned it, which is something that the Nightcap stuff really doesn't do, because it sounds like a finished product.
Yeah.
I mean, mostly.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, when Nightcap was the only available option to listen to this stuff, I never thought of it as a really incomplete album, to be honest with you, because it was really, he had a good sequence. It sounded great to my ears. Now that I hear this new version, it really was incomplete, and it needed a lot of work. And of course, there's a missing side 4 that we don't know whether it was even composed, and it was never recorded. So
I have some theories about that side 4, but we can kind of get to that later.
Yeah. Sure.
Maybe at the end of this, we could do like a summary where I could talk about all my speculation based on what evidence is there. There's one more thing to mention, and that's that the material as it was originally intended is all jumbled up. At least the sides are jumbled up. Side 3 is presented first.
It's in reverse. It's side 3, side 2, side 1.
Side 3, side 2, and side 1. And it works. It works just fine, like you said, as a flow. And it does work as a, complete product. So I do think that, to kind of summarize my thoughts on Nightcap, at least the first disc of Nightcap, I think this was good for what it was at the time. Mm-hmm. I think that it was great for the time, and it certainly did kind of whet our appetites for what else is in those sessions, even more. And we can kind of move on.
I think a lot of people probably thought that that was all there was, because it's 70 minutes of music.
Well, unless you read A New Day magazine and followed
that's true.
Cup of Wonder.
But the average consumer, I mean, not everyone who bought Nightcap had access to those resources. No. And 1993, I don't think. I mean, I was 3 years old in 1993, so it's not as if I remember anything. But I don't think the internet was what it is today, with You had to
It,
be
it
on a
wasn't.
news
No.
group and then discuss this with people who had A New Day magazine. So I'm
Well,
glad to believe that a lot of people thought that this was probably the complete album or close to. But Nightcap in general showed us that there was a lot of stuff, even with the release of a 5 LPs box set, there was still a lot of stuff in the vaults that could have been released, and that was of good quality.
yeah.
And of course, we got further proof of that in most recent years. But getting back to the Chateau, before we go on, I think it's worth mentioning that there's a bootleg called Minstrels in the Red House, I think, which has side one of the Chateau stuff. And I don't know from where that thing comes from. I mean, the tape source, I don't know from where it comes from. But it sounds to me like it isn't even a proper mix. It sounds like they had all the tracks of the multi-tracks opened and they just ran with it. And it's fascinating even today because there are bits of music that didn't end up even on the Steven Wilson box set.
Yeah.
It's pretty much stuff for the completists. So
Yeah.
don't rush and go try to find it.
And,
But it's very interesting.
and that, that kind of sums up something that I wanted to mention about the Chateau D'Herouville sessions in general, is that this isn't material for the new Jethro Tull fan to dive into. This is something that, if you love the material from that time period, you owe it to yourself to check out. But what I was going to mention is that, yes, the average listener, the average, we'll use that ugly word, consumer, the average consumer probably didn't have access to the internet, A New Day magazine in the 90s. But my dad is a huge Tull fan, and he had a New Day subscription. And I remember being a kid and doing book reports in school on A New Day magazine. David Rees, I hope Dave Rees never hears this, because it would probably embarrass him horribly. But so I read about, what's this song from 1972 called Sailor? And I remember being very young and accessing Cup of Wonder and downloading the MP3s of Sailor and, Hard-Headed English General and these kind of songs that were
the Big
kind
Top
of
was
legendary.
there too,
And the Big Top, and so these had to have come from this bootleg, what'd you call it, Minstrel in the Red House?
Minstrel in the Red House, I think,
Yeah, it had to have come from that bootleg. And I hadn't heard the full bootleg in probably over 10 years, because I remember listening to it shortly before the box set came out. And there definitely is some, I wouldn't call it, there's not a whole lot of like what I'd call material that's different, but the arrangements are different. And one thing that struck me in listening to this is that Skating Away on the Thin Ice of a New Day has the accordion tracks, and it has electric guitar. And this got my mind wondering, like, oh, okay, wait a minute. Were those recorded in France and then dubbed over for War Child, or are those the same sessions and they just chose not to use them? Was this some mistake not to use them?
I think there's not an answer to this with the information we have now, because for all we know, it could have been a case of Steven Wilson wanting to the Chateau mix of Skating Away to sound different than the War Child album version. But it's also possible that that stuff was simply on the multi-tracks, and whoever compiled the bootleg just went with it.
I see.
We don't have enough information for this. I mean, my opinion is that if that stuff was recorded at the Chateau, Steven Wilson would have mixed in.
Yeah, who knows? And I'm guessing there's some sort of sessionography, but I still kind of don't mind it, because we do have, the full mix of Skating Away on the War Child set. So I don't mind that it's stripped back so much. And I also don't mind that some of the music, some little things are missing. Like there's a little bit of like King Crimson-y, soft machine improvisation at the end of No Rehearsal.
Ah,
It's
yeah,
kind of cool. That
yeah.
I kind of was like, oh, that was kind of neat.
I missed that on the box set actually because Steven Wilson actually included the very beginning of it during the fade out.
Yes, yeah.
I missed that. It sounds a little Zappa-esque too, which can't be bad. One thing that I definitely missed and that Steven Wilson rightfully mixed out is the little bit that in the middle of No Rehearsal when Ian goes rum bum 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 bum. Yeah.
I love that.
That is great. I'm so sorry didn't include that.
I agree with you. I'm sure that it would have confused some people, but to me, it's like a fascinating glimpse into their process.
Yes.
It's like now we know that if Anderson wants something to be played on another instrument, he either sings it or plays it. And that's like, I guess that's probably a really standard way of doing things, because that's the way I do things too. But it's still very charming to hear it all these years later. It's like, oh, okay, that's cool. A guide vocal.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that on Nightcap too, because when Stephen did the two parts of Critique Publique and Segutem together, which is probably what they would have done in 1972, but on Nightcap they didn't do that. So there's a little bit of that at the beginning of part 2, which has another name like Post Last, I think. Should have done my homework better here because
Post Last, you're correct.
Yeah.
You win
Great.
a Mercedes.
Oh God, sure. It might be a little pricey to ship it to Italy, but fine to me.
We'll just
Bring
drive it over. So we're kind of segueing into the Steven Wilson mix, which for visual aid, I will provide the record album.
Yeah,
Hopefully
I will just show this beautiful thing here.
Mine is too beautiful to show. It's in the bookcase behind me, and I will not allow human eyes to see it. Even when I operate this box set, I do it with my eyes closed because it's too precious.
It's the cat that brings it up for you because
you
said
Servo.
Human eyes. So
yeah, human eye, but the cat, and he's even read the liner notes to me. That's how we did our research today. Anyway.
All right.
So we're going to begin talking about the Steven Wilson sessions, which I guess, or the Steven Wilson mixes, which I guess we have been from the beginning in a way.
Yeah.
But I think that from a historical perspective, this is the most revealing of what was done there. It's very warts and all. And I love that there's an explanation in the liner notes here that Steven Wilson argued against using the flute overdubs with his reasoning for this was that he felt that the only people who are going to be listening to this are the hardcore fans, and he's probably right. Yeah. And that we would want to hear the way it was when they left it. We would want to hear it historically. And
I agree.
I loved reading that because it's like, this is why you want Steven Wilson on your projects. He is going to speak his mind, even around his heroes, which, takes a good bit of courage, I think, to stand up for something like that.
Yeah, and also remember that this box set series had just started when this thing was done, and it wasn't a given at all that we would have done a Passion Play and all the other albums.
No.
So even better, I think.
And this is kind of the first, talking about the extended performance box set. That was kind of the first one to be an expanded Tull record, because you had Aqualung with the outtakes at that point, and that was pretty much it.
Because there are no bonus tracks on Thick as a Brick. I can't remember if they had done Benefit by them, but there was nothing that
there was nothing we hadn't heard before. There was new mixes of some B-sides and some stuff, but this had previously unheard music for the first time.
No, Aqualung has some as the Glenn Cornick version of My God. Yeah.
That's right. You're right. But, still, this did set a precedent for, say, like having an hour's worth of new tracks on Broadsword of the Beast. or the extra tracks that showed up on Stormwatch. Like that was incredible to hear that stuff.
Or even Old Aces Die Hard. We should just name drop this thing here.
Yeah, that's another one. And so back to the Chateau sessions here. One thing that I wanted to talk about, because you do have the complete side one, and right from the get-go of this, like it feels like a band. Like Big Top to me sounds like something they could have opened their shows with back then.
Yes, I'm so sad they completely abandoned that piece because first of all, it was musically strong.
Yeah.
And then it really sets you into the mood of listening to this. It's intriguing enough. It has a little bit of humor at the beginning, the opera-like vocals.
Yes.
So it's it really. I mean, this is all subjective, but I think if I have to choose, this would probably be my favorite incarnation of Jethro Tull.
Mine as well. Yeah.
And they had a particular way of making music, or even the spirit of the band, and this track here really summarized a lot of that spirit, in my opinion. Which is sad, but probably Ian Anderson probably thought it was too incomplete, I guess, because there are no vocals. But I don't think it was ever meant to have vocals. I mean, just by listening to it.
Yeah, and it also proves to me that John Evans was one of the major strengths of this band.
Yes.
Because his mini Moog leads on this are incredible. They bring a smile to my face every time I hear them.
My favorite prog keyboard players are Tony Banks and John Evans. They're very melodical. I actually feel pleasure in listening to their parts, even though they may not be the most technically impressive keyboard players in the genre. They just sound great to me. They add something important to the music.
But you don't necessarily think, great mini Moog players. John Evans isn't necessarily the first name that comes to mind, but here he is playing some just incredible stuff, right off the top here, right off the Big Top. But, you kind of have the three sides here that are broken up into thematic ideas, with side one being kind of like life is the play is life. Mm-hmm. And that does kind of still spill over into side two with Left Right. Like Left Right still feels like it's part of that suite to me. Yeah,
and it was performed on stage just before audition when they played it live. So it makes sense.
Yeah,
and this also, I think this is also an indication that the running order that you see on the tapes may have not been the definitive one.
Sure, I thought of that too, but moving on to side two here, now we're like talking about the critics with Solitaire and Critique Oblique.
Yeah.
And then side three is like the Lewis Carroll animal stuff. And I made a comment in my notes that like when Pink Floyd does animal surrealism, it's George Orwell.
Yeah.
But when Jethro Tull does animal surrealism, it's more like Alice in Wonderland. It's like this quaint,
but I think
it's time for tea, kind of thing.
One thing they both have in common is that they're very, very British.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there is the social satire to the Tull as well, the tiger and stuff.
Just
the pinstripe coat.
More humoristical compared to Pink Floyd.
Right. Yeah, Pink Floyd's more dark and political, but it's still here. Like those comments are still here. So what I wanted to mention was I had a thought last night that I didn't write down in my notes, because the few times I heard the Critique Oblique suite, I had the same impression that you did, that it sounds a little empty, that it's a little repetitive. But last night I was just kind of sitting back and listening to it and just soaking it all in. And I realized that the Critique Oblique suite was kind of formed like Thick as a Brick, and that it starts off with the acoustic guitar, and then it has like the big bombastic sections. And there's a great
thought.
There's a great smattering of that Critique Oblique suite that makes up most of the first half of the Passion Play record.
Well, maybe not most, but most of it went on a Passion Play. So,
well, like Best Friends is in there.
Yes,
I think
Critique Oblique, obviously.
Yeah, but there's another piece in there, like the the part where there's multi-track flute solo.
Yes,
is in that piece, and that just blew my mind. I'd forgotten about that or didn't
Yeah.
realize that. Or
And
maybe the fact that the flute overdubs were so, like I said, oversaturated on Nightcap, it never processed to me how much of this material was reused.
I'm fascinated by that section because it sounds incredibly similar on a Passion Play, and yet at the same time it sounds incredibly different.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if it's because I'm used to the version of on Nightcap where there are a lot of flute solos. It's almost jammy, for lack of better terms. I don't think Ian Anderson really likes jamming, or anyone on Jethro Tull.
Yes.
But it really sounds like prog rock, you know.
It does, yeah.
While on a Passion Play, it's more composed. There's no room for improvisation or stretching out or anything. Both versions are really impressive. I mean, that's one of the pieces of music that even the fans that do not like a Passion Play usually enjoy. So that says a lot.
And I guess it just had never occurred to me that they had mined so much of that particular suite for the first part of it. Because I think Memory Bank is maybe the piece I'm thinking of that's in there.
Yeah, I think so.
Because and yeah, I just that kind of blew my mind, because I used to, you know, sort of think that there was nothing going on, but now it's like, oh wow, that's actually one of the most fascinating parts of the album, because they used a lot of that.
Before we move on, I think this is a good place to mention that although I don't think I absolutely do not believe that was to be the real name, but the Chateau album had a working title, which was the one after the Afterlife. I think it's mentioned on the liner notes on this Thing of Beauty here.
So moving on to side 3, this is of course where Nightcap begins, which is an interesting choice for Nightcap. But I kind of like how, you know, after all this furious, like you said, prog rock jamming, we go back to just little, you know, just like a little bit of acoustic guitar, a little bit of saxophone, and it's very it's like a contrast and relief to what's come before. And what's interesting that, you know, because like the Passion Play box did reveal this through the sessionography and like the tape boxes and stuff, but here on the vinyl version they've edited back in the Hare story, the Hare who lost his spectacles.
I'm so glad. And
I am too, actually, even though it's very skeletal, it's incomplete, it's basically just piano and voice. It does wonders for the pacing of side 3 that I find really interesting.
It's true. Well, it really gives a different perspective on the piece too, I think.
Yes, I like the way that it's sort of like an interlude, a connection between the Animal dances, which I love. They're so catchy and memorable.
Yeah, and they're very. I mean, the piece of music that appeared on the Passion Play, they're very unlike anything else Jethro Tull did.
Yeah.
Those dances, they're very different than anything else, and makes them even more fascinating.
And yeah, and of course they were mined for basically the opening of a Passion Play, like the opening fanfare, I guess you could say, which is cool.
Yeah, that piece they ended up using is the one that sounds more like Jethro Tull to me, maybe because it's a little bit folksy. It's like a jig.
Yeah, and I love the way that on the vinyl that the Hare story segues into Law of the Bungle, or aka Look at the Animals. It just, to me, they just feel like, oh, that's one piece now. That's so cool the way that works.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if that was something that they did for the new vinyl, or if it's what was intended. I mean, it sounds like it was intended, but
it does sound like it was intended. Yeah. And yeah, so we both kind of mentioned that Look at the Animals is, to me, it's one of the strongest songs from the sessions. And the reason for this is that it feels like a surrealist update, a sequel even to Mother Goose from the Aqualung record.
That's an interesting take, I think.
And I'm talking thematically, not necessarily musically, but thematically. It feels
I
like
agree.
A sequel.
I agree. I mean, it's Mother Goose is probably even more absurd than that, but yeah, it makes sense to me. I'd never thought about that. Yeah, I agree. And of course, it's a prequel to Sea Lion, the Bungle in the Jungle
Can you repeat everything you just said, because you were breaking up like crazy?
Okay, I thought you were intently listening to me. Appears you weren't. What do I have to repeat? No, okay, don't keep this on the final edit. All right. So, Sea Lion. I think we can if we can backtrack a little. When earlier you mentioned that the Pink Floyd way of looking at the animals is very different than Jethro Tull's, and I think Sea Lion actually has some compatibility with the Pink Floyd, because it's the most aggressive piece of the ones about the animals. I mean, it's the more direct one, the most direct one, and I mean, Roger Waters would have never written it like that, but it's really more. I mean, it's more similar to that than compared to, I mean, something like The Ant or The Hare Who Lost the Spectacles or whatever thing.
Yeah,
They did.
It's almost as if, not to jump ahead to War Child here, but it's almost as if Ian Anderson swapped the life as a play metaphor for life as a circus.
Yeah. Yeah. This could be a good place where to speculate what could have been on side 4.
Yes.
Because my theory, and then I'll let you speak, is that since side 1 and side 2 were loosely connected, that may have been the case with side 4 as well on side 3. So maybe just maybe stuff like Bungle in the Jungle or Sea Lion, which we have absolutely no proof that it was even written by the time of the Chateau sessions, maybe it was part of side 4, but alas, we have no idea.
Yeah, and I know for a long time people speculated that Bungle in the Jungle was recorded during the Chateau D'Herouville sessions, and that turned out to be not to be the case.
Yeah.
Possibly they were mixing up titles, because there's 2 songs called Law of the Bungle.
I think it was Ian Anderson himself who made some comment that someone misinterpreted as, or rather, they interpreted as him saying that the song was born during the Chateau sessions, but to me, it was more talking about the idea of the song, the lyrical idea.
Thematically, definitely it connects, and so yeah, that's a good theory. I sort of think that a lot of what ended up as side 2 of A Passion Play may have been at least planned for side 4. They may have sketched a lot of that music out. And it also makes sense thematically, because the end of A Passion Play brings back the animals. There's the line about the animals queuing at the gate to get into the afterlife, presumably.
Yeah.
And then also life as a play, that comes back in. That thread is inside 2 of A Passion Play. Yeah, it seems potentially, it seems like it's a potential that, since so much of the Passion Play material basically was, I guess, side 2 and side 3 of the Chateau Disaster sessions, like a lot of that stuff is what ended up in A Passion Play. To me, it sort of stands to reason that whatever they had sketched for side 4 ended up as side 2 of A Passion Play in some way.
Well, it could be true, even because a lot of the stuff on the Passion Play album is very complex. It's very complex writing.
Yeah.
And they really have very little time to write and arrange all of that stuff. So it makes sense that at least some of it may have been unrecorded Chateau material. But again, I mean, it really is frustrating, because we really have little information about the session themselves, even on the book. Like, we have every side as a date, but I'm not convinced that they recorded that stretch of music all in that date. And then there was something. I mean, it sounds to me like what they had was an assembly that it probably all that it oh, fuck it. It's probably all that oh god, I can't say it's probably all that it exists. That's a tongue twister. We can't keep this, Okay, what I was trying to say was that I'm not convinced the full sequences were all recorded the same day. So I think the sessions may have been longer than indicated, and that all that survives is the material placed on the reels, like as thick as a brick, like in the big chunks of music.
Yeah.
Because it really, that would mean that they only had 3 sides worth of stuff written, and it simply doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Why would they go into the studio and pay that much money to do a double album with only 3 sides prepared? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Back to the non-existing side 4. I guess when the Steven Wilson box set came out, the A Passion Play and Extended Performance box set came out, I was kind of expecting at least to read something about side 4, like notes, or because Ian Anderson must have had some idea. I mean, when he did the 1993 overdubs, he said he did those because he remembered the lyrics of the missing sections and the vocal melodies. So I was kind of expecting that stuff to be at least on the book. But
yeah, they should have printed it. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe he forgot, or maybe he didn't really have notes, or that would have been interesting though.
It would have been. Yeah.
And of course, it's not on the vinyl either.
No.
So that's a shame.
One thing that I do like about the vinyl, though, is that I like that for side 4, they included the officially released versions. From a historical perspective, you can see, well, this is where they started with, and this is how it was released. And I like the story that this tells as just, a piece of media.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something you don't even really get with the Wilson box, because in recent years, they've added, like the box set versions to the DVD and stuff. But at that time, they didn't. So I do like that. I
think I can't remember when it was the first time they did that. It may have been with, I mean, of course there was the flat transfers.
Yeah.
But the first time they actually issued the box set versions,
it was Broadsword.
Yeah, no, it was Benefit, I think. The new version, the second version. I think there are the Living in the Past mixes.
Okay.
Yeah, there definitely were the Living in the Past mixes. I must confess I almost never listened to that disc, but yeah, I'm sure there were. I'm sure there were there. Yeah, that's interesting. And another thing that I think people may complain about the vinyl is that it isn't a complete new mix with the fluid overdubs, but that would require a lot of studio time, a lot of more budget.
Yeah.
And that simply isn't practical, I think.
Yeah.
For something like
that's
that.
honestly something that I kind of wished, because, if you think about it, like the box set has been out of print for years. Yeah. The last time it was in print was 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so in the intervening, last couple of years, you were really relying on Nightcap again, because Nightcap can still be had secondhand fairly affordably. I mean, it always was a budget price disc. So yeah, it would have been nice, since this is like an updated version, a 10 years on version, if we would have had some of those overdubs like on Look at the Animals sprinkled in. But alas.
I don't think a 4th release of the Chateau stuff is going to happen, like a new modern mix with the flute overdubs. But I think something that may have paved the way for future releases is the little new mix of the hair, because it's something that wasn't included in the box set, and the fans were really intrigued by that, and they included it. And we know there's a lot of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, new stuff on the box set, but there's also some of it that we know it exists and it wasn't released because maybe it was too incomplete. Maybe Ian Anderson didn't feel like releasing something like that. I mean, something like Advertising Man, obviously. And maybe, just maybe, this new mix of the hair could pave the way at least for some of that. But yeah, we shall see. I mean,
yeah. I do think it's possible that the extended performance box set will be reissued as it was 10 years ago, because we have seen a precedence for this with the Aqualung box being reissued, Songs from the Wood, Minstrel in the Gallery, Thick as a Brick. So I definitely think it could be reissued at some point. But this kind of brings me into sort of the last thing I want to talk about. And I don't, there's really not much you can add here, but I want to say that as good as the vinyl mix is, the vinyl sounds fantastic. This 5.1 surround mix of this is the way to go for me. For me, it's the way to go. Because, and this is still one of my favorite Jethro Tull surround mix experiences, because you feel like you're a fly on the wall of the sessions, and you have the acoustic guitars panned right in front of you, and they sparkle, and you have the vocals sometimes coming in from the back, or the overdub, sax overdubs coming in from the back. And it really just feels like you're immersed in Tull 1972, just playing like their lives depend on it. And
yeah,
it's compelling as hell experience for sure.
That's why I wonder why Steven Wilson didn't make stuff like the alternate take of Working Joe on the A box set. I wonder why he didn't mix that on surround, because to me it would be just the thing to do if we have something like that, a live in the studio version.
All right. Well, is there anything we want to add, kind of to summarize what we've said? What is the best version? I mean, I think we know what it is, but what's the best version of these sessions to own?
Well, okay, sonically, it's the Steven Wilson mix, because it's really faithful to how it could have sounded in 1972. It really is a very good mix. It's quite clear, but it's up to you if you prefer the version with or without the overdubs. I mean,
yeah.
Both options are perfectly valid. I myself would like, as much as I'm grateful, again, that they put out a version without the flute overdubs, I myself would like a vintage sounding version with the flute.
So would I, yeah.
So, I mean, sonically, that's the answer. Musically, I mean, your opinion is good as any, I think.
Yeah, and it's not like, it's not like it's a George Lucas situation where Ian Anderson wants to smash every old copy with a hammer.
No, quite the opposite. In fact, I think those box sets really bring back in print everything, which is, I mean, for a limited period of time, because they're limited editions and all. But it seems to me like, this is probably going off topic a little bit, but I really don't understand people that are really so against Steven Wilson remixing. I mean, it's fine if you don't like the results. I mean, they definitely change sometimes the character of the album. I mean, something like the Steven Wilson mix is much more cleaner, so the album has a different sound and all of that. But it's not like the old version are out of print suddenly. It's not like it's not the Genesis situation where the Nick Davis remix is completely made the older version out of print. So you just have a new option.
Yeah, in that case, that's actually reverted back. The original mixes are back in print.
Okay, this is something I didn't know.
Yeah, oh yeah, as of the SACD releases from this year, the original masters of they're back. I got to get them, but anyway.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah, actually. I got to get them. But
we could talk Genesis at a later date. I think that would be.
I think that's a great idea. But so okay, here's my recommendation. Since the box set, our coveted holy grail of Tulldom is out of print, I think this is the version to get. I think the vinyl, if we're talking about right now, you want this. However, if you are a major Tull head, as we are, look for this online. Look for this on Discogs. Add this to your collection as well. Make up your own mind. Listen to both. And guess what? Tell us in the comments what you think. See, I had to work that in somewhere.
Yeah, I was about to say that if you don't do vinyl, it's also available as a digital lossless download, I think.
It is. And so are the entire Passion Play extended performance box set. You can hear that on streaming. So there's really nothing to lose here. No,
it's actually the best option available if you are interested in this particular time frame.
Okay, so I think we've covered pretty much everything that we wanted to in discussing the Chateau D'Herouville sessions. Once again, if you enjoyed this sort of thing and you're watching this out on YouTube land, give us a like, subscribe to the channel. Let us know which version of this is your favorite. Listen to it online. Come back. Let us know which is your favorite. Do you prefer with or without flute overdubs, or are you more like me, where I feel like I wish they were more decisive about which ones they included and which ones they didn't. Sort of in the way the broadsword set was. But yeah, with that in mind, Jaco, I want to thank you once again for joining me today.
It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure for me as well.
I will be back.
And I was going to say, we hope to do more of these. We were kind of discussing off air, kind of some more ideas of how we could go back to the tall box sets and discuss them, especially in anticipation to the rumored bursting out set, which is supposed to come sometime in the next year. So that'll be good.
I think, I don't think we have a date for this, but I think it may be later this year. I mean, that was my understanding from what I know.
Fall.
Yeah.
I can't wait for that one. That one's going to be fantastic.
I hope it's not going to be a situation like the broadsword box set, but it doesn't seem to be.
I want to thank you, Jaco, for joining me, and also to all of you out there for watching, and we'll be back real soon. All right. Bye-bye.